And, I think that's unfortunate. So she refused even to meet my colleague, who was on a humanitarian mission, who was going to speak to the largely Christian community in Gaza, which is small. There's only about 1,000 of them left, apparently. Historically, it was quite important. Gaza produced quite a few saints. There's some churches there. But obviously, numerically now, they're not very important. And because he was going to a Christian thing, no, she wouldn't meet him because, she's a Muslim. Well, it opened my eyes to the problems of what it's like living in Gaza, because you can't really work for peace. I asked, are there any peace groups? Are there any non-violence groups active? Well, no, because that would be seen as collaboration with Israel, and Israel is the enemy. So the thinking in Gaza is very much, we are the proud resistance, we will fight to the end. And we will maintain our right to dignity and so on. And I suppose that's why they allow Hamas to kind of run the territory. The details are interesting because, of course, Hamas has been elected to be the representative, like the town council, the governments of Gaza. And presumably these people like my friend or, family and relatives, they all vote for Hamas. I don't know, I haven't got a clue. It's a problem, therefore, isn't it? I mean, we're talking like a huge conceptual gap. You see, my friend in Israel says Hamas are all terrorists and they've got to be stopped. The people of Gaza see them as heroic resistance fighters who are fighting the terrorists, who they see as the Israelis. It's like a dissonant narrative that's been going on, and it's been going on ever since, for a very long time. It's been going on. When the British were running Palestine during the Mandate period in the 1920s and 30s, it was already going on. There were street riots, there were pogroms between Arabs and Israelis, even when the British were running things. We couldn't solve it then. How can it be solved now? Well, I don't have all the answers. I was also listening with great interest to the debate that took place today in the Security Council. It was online, you could watch it live, which I did. And I heard comments from many of the foreign ministers and representatives from different countries to the UN Security Council. There's a consensus there. I mean, the Israeli ambassador to the UN made the same points effectively that my friend in Israel makes, which is this is all Hamas's fault. We have the right to go in and stop them. The only problem with that viewpoint is that the mechanics, the logistics of how you do that, I think are virtually impossible. Because Hamas is very much embedded into the culture of Gaza. It's like, I don't know, let's imagine that I'm trying to attack Israel and I'm going to take out every Likud party member. I've declared Likud a terrorist organisation. I'm a UN occupying force coming in. And I'm going to strategically pinpoint bomb Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, whatever, to remove all Likud people. Am I going to remove all the voters too? Or just the officials? Okay, let's say just the officials. Well, it would be, it'd be impossible because, and what if there's a Likud official who sends his children to this school? So, am I entitled to blow that school up because he might be there, joining a children's party? It's a non-defensible ethical position to say that we can target and pinpoint and just take out the Hamas leadership, which is kind of what Israel's trying to say. Okay, so the only real solution, I think, has to be an overall systemic geopolitical solution to the entire Palestinian-Israeli problem. And, it should have been done by now. The world knows this is true. I was listening with great interest to the words of the Indian ambassador, the Irish ambassador to the UN, and the British ambassador, and the American representative of Biden. I mean, and all the others, the Algerian, there were 20 or 30 who were speaking today. What they all said, apart from the Israeli representative, is that this solution has to be within the context of a two-state solution. There has to be a viable state of Palestine created. And that includes Gaza. Okay, now that's what is the official position of the British state. It was very interesting to hear the British representative say that, a woman. It was interesting, it's part of the Indian commitment, and every other state that spoke said the same thing, including the American, i.e. the USA. Mexico, they all said the same thing. Now, and France. I think the speech by the French ambassador was excellent. But what's being done about that? You see, that's just rhetoric. Is the UN just there as a talking shop for rhetoric? I was listening also to Al Jazeera's activist coverage of Palestinian human rights activists in places like Canada and elsewhere. They've reached a point where they no longer believe the rhetoric of the UN. You can go to the UN headquarters buildings and spout, yes, we want two-state solution, but if nothing ever is done towards it, nothing ever happens, you're gonna despair. The mental health rate of people in Gaza, and this is before these bombings started, is abysmal. As I learned from my friend, people are despairing. People see no way out. Children are being terrorized by the bombing. I heard interviews on Al Jazeera with doctors and teachers. I'm a teacher, so there was a young woman teacher with 5 kids, and the kids are all in trauma because bombs are going off all the time, and they don't know if they're going to live through to the morning, so they don't dare sleep. People are roads are being targeted on the way to hospitals. Buildings seem to be being targeted that are not just, military targets for Hamas. One ambassador said that, this was the British ambassador said this, 23 schools have been destroyed so far, and 500 houses, as well as media buildings, which, according to media representatives, have got nothing to do with Hamas. These were housing Al Jazeera and things. It's as if, what Israel is saying it's doing and what it's actually doing are very different things. 500 houses, 23 schools, and this was the UK saying that. So I think the world needs to really intervene. The UN is working on a press declaration, but that's not enough. What I think needs to happen is that the UN should get together, all the states that say they want a two-state solution, need to get together with the Palestinians and set up a commission for the establishment of a Palestinian state. This has got to come about, because you see, the route map at the moment is we'll have peace talks. During the peace talks, Israel will agree terms to permit a Palestinian state to come into being, and then we'll set up a Palestinian state. Now, the problem with that route map is that that's what's been tried ever since 1940s. There was a categorical fundamental error made by the Palestinians back in 1948 when they didn't set up their Palestinian state there. They had the offer, the option. They could have announced, we are creating a Palestinian state in parallel to the Israeli one. But they didn't. It was a fatal error. But it's not too late to actually right that wrong. What the Palestinians should do, with the support of the UN and the international community, is create a feasibility commission or a commission of, inauguration towards a Palestinian state. Now, of course, Israel will probably, I don't want to generalize, there are different forces in Israel. The progressive ones, the moderate ones, the intelligent ones, the peace-loving ones, will endorse and support that. They will get involved in the process, and they will ensure that into the constitution of that Palestinian state, when it's set up, which would include Gaza, are written clauses of non-violence with Israel. they would have an automatic peace treaty that neither state would attack each other, including cyber warfare and so on, right from day one. I also heard the British ambassador from Palestine speaking, very intelligent man. I used to know the old one, Afif Safieh, who was a highly articulate intellectual, a Palestinian Christian, and who was also the ambassador from Palestine to the Vatican. Palestinians are incredibly intelligent and good people, and we should never forget that they include Christians as well as Muslims, as well as people from all over, and secular thinkers, humanists, philosophers, on a par with any other intellectuals on the planet. This demonization of Palestinians as all Islamic terrorists is just untrue and deliberate in order to keep the war machine stoked. Okay, so, and this is where the media is complicit in not solving this problem, because the media pander to the lowest common denominator in many countries, like they did in Britain over Brexit, and still do. The shocking gutter press whip up anti-EU propaganda and anti-French and so on, and gunboats in Jersey. I mean, that's the level at which these people operate. Well, no, it's not good enough. I actually think there should be a law passed in Britain and other countries that the media have a responsibility to promote peace. And if they publish articles and journals which demonise falsely and fakery, which whip up hatred towards other countries, it should be fined. I think the media have to begin to play a role for peace. That's what I've been up to, is monitoring all this, and I think that there should be a commission to set up a Palestinian state. Some of the speakers talked about this, but I think it should be done officially. Now, it's too late now. We've got to do this. I don't want this to be dragging on anymore, because until and when that happens, these kind of spats are going to continue. And Hamas have to sign up to this as well. You see, when you become a proper state, you don't fire rockets at your neighbour. I still think that the peace agreement that Netanyahu and Trump proposed, in my detailed critique of it, which I wrote, I still think there are some good points to it that should be brought out of the cupboard. And much as I felt Trump was a very abysmally poor US president, on this matter he had one or two good ideas, and I think that should be brought back out of the cupboard, and it would make the basis of a new potential peace settlement for the whole situation. Among the other things that Trump and Netanyahu proposed was a total freedom of access to all pilgrims in all of Palestine and Israel to visit sacred sites, an airport for East Jerusalem, which would bring in Muslim tourists from abroad and boost the Palestinian economy, a port for Gaza eventually, and meantime the use of ports in other nearby port facilities, and a high-speed train connecting Gaza to the West Bank. These are all extremely good ideas, and I support them, and I thought of some of them myself. So yes, we need to action the good bits of that peace plan. Instead of just throwing it in the bin, it should be taken out of the bin, looked at again, and the Americans should host some new discussions under Biden and Blinken, and they should get that peace plan dusted down and totally reworked with Palestinian input, and that should be part of the ceasefire agreement. So, in the next couple of days there should be a ceasefire, and the US will announce, I hope, the UN would announce, that there will be a resumption of these peace talks, using that plan as a basis to then rework it. And I know that Biden will find it very difficult to admit that anything Trump did was at all useful, but I think in this case an exception should be made. At least it was something. Right. I'm I won't continue with that, but just to say that my heart goes out to everyone involved in this conflict. We have to solve this. That's just the basics, and we have to get a Palestinian state. I'd like to see one, established, and for that we have to have a commission that leads up to it. That's responsible statesmanship by all sides, and the Israelis should support that as well, because to make peace you have to have someone equal that you can make peace with. The current situation dehumanises the Palestinians, it traumatises them, it makes them more likely to turn to terrorism, it makes these rockets coming more and more likely, and it can never be defeated militarily. The only solution is to make peace, to shape the hand of equal mutual recognition. And for that, a Palestinian state is necessary. Now, Britain proclaims today, through its ambassador, that's our policy. Okay, let's host that commission. We left this mess with our mandate. Let the British, who want to play a role on the world stage, ironically, they're no longer even part of the quartet, which includes the European Union, Russia, and America, but no Britain. Let's have the let's have the British host a commission for the establishment of a Palestinian state. That would go some little ways towards the cleaning up of their karma as a nation, as a culture. Right. And if I was living in London still and running meetings in the House of Lords, I would set it up myself, but somebody else is going to have to do that. But I'm certainly willing to help, and the Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy stands willing to help with the thinking behind that. What would a Palestinian state look like? How will it function? How will its economy work? Which bits of the Trump-Netanyahu peace plan are viable? How will Hamas be recalibrated to fit in with the concept of a democratic nationhood and so on? Those are important and big questions. Okay, I want to move on and say something else I've been up to that's kind of relevant. Is I also took part in a thing called the Galileo Commission, which is run by the Scientific Medical Network, which is looking at new philosophical paradigms about reality. What is reality? Conventional science says it's a whole bunch of material things, physical stuff, matter, and then we're complex material things, which then our brains create something called consciousness. And if they go wonky, you give us pills, and that calms people down. And so that's the materialist paradigm, right? The Galileo Commission is saying no. Actually, there's a few anomalies with that thing. And yesterday online there was a brilliant discussion, a few hundred people, a panel led by people who've had these anomalous experiences and then studied them scientifically. So we had Evan Alexander, the neuroscientist who had a near-death experience, and we had other thinkers who've been studying all this stuff. It was chaired by my friend David Lorimer, who spoke at the World Intellectual Forum a little while ago. We had Bill Bengston, an American philosopher, Bernard Kastrup, who is an expert from CERN. He worked at CERN, and he's discovered, no, that material paradigm doesn't function anymore, even in physics. You can't work with that. Something else is going on. Jude Currivan, a British researcher who's chipping away at this paradigm reform needed. And Gail Kimball, an American researcher who's interviewed 65 leading scientists around the world, and they're all coming to this view that we need a new paradigm. We have to go beyond the old materialist paradigm. And I asked the question, well, okay, if we're going towards a new paradigm of the functional role of consciousness in relation to matter, maybe consciousness is primary. So this is called philosophically objective idealism. This is what Hegel proposed. It's what the Advaita Vedanta proposes. It's what Buddhism proposes with its concept of the Buddha nature and enlightenment. That absolute consciousness is causative behind reality, and you know, it is the functional source of our forms and structures. It's what Platonic idealism also proposes, and Neoplatonism, and it's what Theosophy proposes, which was really evolved Neoplatonism. Now, as a philosopher, I do think that is the most likely hypothesis about what on earth is going on in reality. And the thing is that, you know, it was a very high-level discussion. The question I raised, well, what implications does that have for peacemaking? You know, the old-style international relations is stuck in this model, billiard ball model, where nation-states are like hard billiard balls that bash into each other every now and then and have wars, and you can't solve that. There is, you know, in the materialist paradigm of international relations, there's only power. There's a Hobbesian world in which power can never be shared; it has to be fought over. And the logic of that materialist view of international relations is just continual, never-ending warfare. And that's kind of what we've got. So this is Gaza versus Israel round 6. And we're going to be sitting here 100, 200 years from now, and it'll be round 10, round 12. You know, and that's a nightmare. What I was asking, and what I'm contributing to this debate, is that we have to take the insights and discoveries of the new generation scientists who are working on post-materialist paradigms. I call it trans-materialism, because it's the insights of materialism are useful, like they're quite good for medicine, they're good for all kinds of things, technology, engineering, etc. We need materialism to understand how the world works. But we have to go beyond mere materialism. I mean, Marx and Engels called it dialectical materialism. We want materialism plus. There's this dialectical process involved in matter. Well, okay, let's call it trans-materialism, because dialectical materialism has too many sort of baggages still carrying on from its misuse. But effectively, trans-materialism is saying there's also something spiritual or noetic about reality, which can't be pinned down to mere matter in the sense that we know it now. You know, inert, objective, etc. So if we apply trans-materialist ways of thinking to international relations, then will and the psychology of peoples becomes formative. If we can get goodwill, say, between enough Israelis and enough Palestinians, if we can get enough goodwill between Hamas officials and Likud officials, if we could get talks going between those two, gosh, you know, like oil and water, but it could be done. If we could get genuine discussions of goodwill among all these UN ambassadors that say they want a two-state solution but actually never do anything about it, if the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine can actually set up a commission to investigate how we can get a Palestinian state, like seriously for real, what are the obstacles, and they're huge, you know, economic, educational, territorial, you know, security, democratic, etc. But they can all be solved if we start naming them. Anyway, that would be my trans-materialist approach to solving the Israel-Palestine problem, which I did talk about in my PhD thesis when I coined the phrase transpersonal history. And that's kind of, you know, what I'm trying to do with my work. But I can't do it alone. We have to work on this together. You know, this is a collective project. Peacemaking is all of us together. And gosh, a lot of people are hurting right now. It's going to be much more difficult now after these killings. You know, we've got over 100 people have died in Gaza from attacks, bombings, and so on, and about 150 have been injured in Israel from these rockets, and about 10 have died. Every death diminishes me, as John Donne said. You know, we're all dying in this conflict, and to me, these types of conflicts show up the poverty of the paradigm that we've been working with, this billiard ball model, international relations, realism, materialism, whatever you want to call it. We need to move beyond. And so, anyway, look into the Galileo Commission. They're doing great work. And then let's apply their insights to how to solve these conflicts between particularly these religious and cultural groups. And look, the Palestinians and the Jews are distant cousins. I mean, they come from the same peoples. I mean, if you go back into the history of the Palestinians, you find, ancient roots just as ancient as anyone in Israel. And they should be proud of each other's heritage and history, just as they are in Lebanon or Syria. As I've said many times, the Hamito-Semitic people are amazing. I'm a Philo-Semite. I love them all. The Egyptians too. Which leads me to Scotland. Because, as you know, I lived there for 7 years. I'm watching with interest as Scotland moves in the direction of statehood. And I think it's the same struggle. You see, the struggle of Palestine to create an independent state out of the chaos is going to be similar to what Scotland faces. Scotland is going to have to walk the same path towards a constitutional settlement with England. And there has to be a second referendum if that independence is what the majority of people want. I mean, when I first looked at this, when I was living in Scotland in 2014 and voted, I voted to keep the UK together. I'm embarrassed to say that, but I thought, gosh, we can't have Scottish independence. It'll be too chaotic, too scary. And I thought, no, the British state is a rational, good thing that we can save and work with and make it better. And then we can keep it together. As a peace force in the world, we can have a referendum to get rid of nuclear weapons from the whole UK. We can transform British foreign policy into a peace direction. We can make Britain beautiful again. That was my naive thinking, and I genuinely believed it, because I did all these meetings in London at the House of Lords, and I've met people quite high up in the British state, and I was setting up a centre for peace studies at the hub of, London. And I believed in the UK project. But unfortunately now, down the line, I see that was naive. And this is why I've changed my tune. As my friends who've watched my work over the years will realise, I now support a Scottish independence and a Scottish state coming into being, because I've realised that the forces that have taken over control of the UK state are so nefarious, so greedy, so dodgy, so Machiavellian and mendacious that they don't deserve it anymore. The old compact that kept our country together has gone, and I think it's time to realise that something new has to be hatched as the egg breaks. As Scotland becomes an independent state, England will be forced to really, really examine its story, and there's going to be a few narrative changes going on. I think the Tories will not last in their Machiavellian grip on the state. Their story is just like the Likud story in Israel. It's an old narrative that depends on demonising the other. They're demonising France, they're demonising the European Union, they're demonising China. They're sending gunboats off to attack China. This is just ridiculous to watch, actually. It's so immature. I also want to say the Welsh are growing out of that narrative. The Welsh have never bought the English narrative, and I was delighted to see they're exploring the citizens' income. The Welsh are going to have a totally different trajectory, which will lead them back into alignment with Scotland and Ireland. I think the Irish problem can only be solved with a referendum on Irish unity, and Sinn Féin have been calling for that. All the other progressive forces of Ulster have to come together and call for that, and should be doing so now. This isn't something you wait for the permission of the English to do. You get on and do it. And I'm speaking as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland. I'm English by culture, but I'm a trans-universalist who looks at this from the perspective of the greater good, from the transpersonal perspective. And I think it will be for the better good of the people of the United Kingdom to let the Irish have reunification and to let the Welsh and the Scots have independence, and then, I believe we'd all be better off back in the EU and aligned with a common peace policy with France, Germany, Italy, Spain, etc., all working together as mature nations and developing the European Union Mediation Service. For that we need UK constitutional reform, obviously. I've talked about this before. And that's really, so I've mapped out a route how we can get there, because, history is very interesting. We're in history, but if you're a scholar like me, you also want to study history as it's happening, and then you want to try and steer it a bit in the direction of the good. That's what I try to do as a philosopher of peace. And now I want to come to the end of my talk. I want to just say that this day I'm publishing volume 3, in the next couple of days, of my Principia Mathematica, my work on, it's entitled Philosophiae Religionis Principia Mathematica. So it's a book about establishing a whole new subdivision of maths and a subdivision of religious studies. And it's talking about religious mathematics. It's a hugely complicated work. I mean, this is as big as what Newton was trying to do in his work, Principia Mathematica, which was a masterpiece when he launched gravity studies. But he said he was humble enough to know that he hadn't finished, it wasn't the last word, and he hadn't explained how gravity works. But he did say in the very last passages of the book that maybe it had something to do with God. Well, I've taken that at its literal, and I've said, okay, so we need a new edition of the sequel to his Principia Mathematica. We have to look at the God theory of maths. And there's a whole section on gravity, there's sections on all different branches of maths and religious studies. It's been absolutely fascinating to write. It feels like I've been channeling stuff from 1,000 years in the future, and for all I know I have, but also from the past, because there's sections on Kala Chakra Tantra and religious mathematics. There's sections on Druidry and religious mathematics, prophetic intelligence and religious mathematics, etc., etc. It's been absolutely fascinating to write. Conflict studies and religious mathematics, and relativity theory and religious maths, algebra and religious maths, and so on. So anyone that's interested in either maths and or religion, or who's a teacher, I mean, the point of this book is that it should be of use to teachers in, secondary schools or in universities, academics teaching degree courses. Also, students that are maybe thinking about what kind of PhD to write. You'll find hundreds of PhD ideas in this book, because this is new stuff. Nobody's. Some scholars have been doing bits of this, and there's a great Jesuit mathematician in Spain who's written about divine mathematics, and there've often been a few little pockets of thinking about this. But this is the first time anyone's put the whole lot together. And of course, what's going on in the Islamic world or the Jewish world with the Kabbalah and Sufism, they're also integrated in here, and in Buddhistic and Jain thought and so on. So it's, anyway, I just want to say I'm really happy that volume 3 is about to be published. I mean, it's been a journey, I tell you. I've been working on this for the last since September last year, so this has been taking a while.